Welcome to Apprentice Marks. My name is John, but more importantly, I'm hungry and I'm in the mood for steak. I bought this Keurig machine at a garage sale for $5. The thought was that I'd leave it out here and have on-demand coffee in the workshop whenever I was working. Unfortunately, it turns out that there was a reason that it was only $5. It worked approximately once and then stopped responding. Piece of shit. Anyway, it's gonna get a good second life. This right here is the part that I'm after. It's the beating heart of the Keurig machine, the little container where the Keurig boils the water that will become your coffee. There's a coil in here that heats the water up. I'm gonna use that to cook my steak. This rocket engine looking thing is the guts of the Keurig. Essentially, it's pretty simple. It pulls water in from this nozzle down here, uses these pumps to shuttle the water up into the boiling chamber up here, and then when the water's boiled, it pushes the water, again, presumably using a pump or maybe some kind of like an air pump to pressurize this chamber, up and into the crane that used to be over here where the K-cup is, and forces the water through that K-cup and down into your coffee cup. All we really need out of here is some of this tubing, the boiling chamber, and one of these pumps. I think these things are check valves. They only allow the water to go in one direction so that you don't get coffee back into the holding tank. Okay, so this is the intake pump here. So this here is at the bottom of the water tank on the Keurig, and this pump pulls that water in, pushes it up past this check valve and into the holding tank where it gets boiled for making coffee. The only thing remaining on this piece here is this board. That contains a MOSFET, which is an electronic switch that turns the heating unit on and off. This big chunk of aluminum here is a heat sink for that MOSFET because it's going to get seriously fucking hot. For our purposes, this is all we're after. This is the heating unit of the Keurig machine. Down here are the terminals for the heater, and you can see that the power for the heater runs up through this guy here. I looked this up. This is a safety switch. All this guy does is it checks to see if the temperature of the body of this thing exceeds 105 degrees Celsius, and if it does, it's an interrupt. It just switches this heater off, so there's a safety mechanism in case the computer gives up and you know there's runaway heat or whatever. It'll turn itself right off at the heater so that it can't continue to heat. This thing over here, meanwhile, is called a thermistor. A thermistor is kind of a cool thing. It's a resistor whose resistance changes relative to the temperature around it. So it's effectively a thermometer. We can measure the resistance across these two leads here, and that'll tell us the temperature of the water inside of this tank on that little nub in there. Now, our sous-vide machine is going to be pretty straightforward in construction. Basically, the idea is that the Arduino is going to turn the heater on and off to regulate the temperature of the water, and the pump is going to make sure that the water is continually circulating so that we get a more even temperature throughout the bath. We can drop our steak directly in the water, let it chooch for 30 minutes, and we'll have a delicious slab of meat. With the heater secure, the next step is to attach our feed pump here so that we get the water in the sous vide machine circulating.
I don't know if actual sous vide machines have water circulators. I've got a pump, so I'm going to give it a shot, but my theory on this is that if we keep the water moving, we'll get more even heating. And after all, if we're trying to make food, we want it to be evenly heated. We don't want to just warm one side, you know?
Time for some water. We've got a super minor leak right in here. You can see it dripping. Something in my mess of hot glue here isn't perfectly sealed, and frankly, there's not really much I can do about that. I got it propped up on a towel, and we'll see how it goes. If we have to top up the water during the cooking, so be it. It'll do for now. All right, the heater is on, the circulation pump is running. We've got the temperature set to 55 degrees C, and actually it's brought the whole thing up to temperature in, just under 5 minutes. It's time to go get some steak. La. All right, we'll get some S&P on there. Put it in this big Ziploc bag here. We're not animals. So we'll get some fine herbage here, a couple of sprigs of rosemary. You gotta have some garlic. Now the key here is to squeeze as much air as we possibly can out of this bag. Water is nice and warm. In with the steak. Steak seems to be floating. Need something to weight it down. This hammer ought to do the trick. Side note, did you guys know that Bo's Lug Tray comes in cans now? This is one of my favorite beers. Oh, it's nice and cold. Our steak has been in the sous vide machine for a little bit over half an hour, and it's really starting to smell great. Now, one downside to this machine is that I'm taking the temperature of the water right over here on the top of the heater. Of course, the water that's right inside of the heating cylinder that we pull out of the Keurig is going to be significantly hotter than the water that's out here that the steak is actually sitting in large part because this is uncovered and in a cheap plastic container that loses a whole lot of heat. So if I measure the temperature of the water out here where the steak is cooking with a meat thermometer that I trust, I get a reading of around 59 degrees Celsius. But in order to attain 59 degrees Celsius, I've actually told the thermostat that I want the water heated to 65 degrees Celsius. So you can see that between here and here, we're losing quite a bit of heat, and that means that I've got to turn the thermometer up higher than I actually need it to be in order to maintain my temperature. If I wanted a better reading, what I should probably have done is mount the thermistor out in the middle here, or maybe over on the far wall of the container away from the heater, so that we have a better idea of what the actual temperature of the water is as opposed to the temperature right at the heater. I'm also having to occasionally top up the water here because of the slow leak that we've got around the heater. So far everything's holding up really well, which is really surprising me given the quality of the build on this thing. The heater's quite warm, but the hot glue isn't tacky, which is great because I didn't even think to check at what temperature hot glue turns back into liquid. The little pump that I'm using for circulation is really hot. It might burn out at some point. Remember, it's not actually getting cooled because it's circulating hot water. So maybe I should have a fan or something on that thing in order to keep it cool. I don't know. The steak has been in the sous vide machine for about an hour and a half, and it's time to pull it out and give it a try. Ooh, that's warm. All right. Let's pull our meat out here. Oh, it smells fantastic. Now, of course, the entire purpose of sous videing something is that you get a perfect temperature on the inside. So if I stab this thermometer in here, We should see an internal temperature, 45 degrees C. That's a good rare. But in order to finish it, we want to get the Maillard reaction on the outside, the caramelization and crisping. I don't have a frying pan or a grill in the garage, but I do have this propane torch. Oh, it's starting to smell like steak in here. Seems the poor cutting mat is bubbling up from the heat. Hope that's not toxic. All right, that looks tasty. Let's try it out. Beautiful cross section. You can see here that it's nice and red all the way through. No gray banding on the side like you usually get when you try and cook a steak on a barbecue. Oh man, that's good. It's nice and juicy in the middle, but it's still got a crisp on the outside. That's a lovely chunk of meat. Yeah, sous-vide's tasty. Let's try more of this shit. Well, that's about it for this project, and surprisingly for something that was so resoundingly stupid, it actually turned out really well. The steak is delicious and the machine works, although I'm not sure if I could cook much more with it without it falling apart. That's it for me. Remember, if you want to keep up with what I'm doing between projects, you can always check me out on Instagram @musicpolice or over on Twitter @ApprenticeMarks. Or you can hit me up on YouTube at youtube.com/c/ApprenticeMarks. Thanks very much for watching. Cheers. Just a quick note from the editor here before I let you go. When I was putting this video together, I filmed a whole bunch of stuff about the electronics and the code that made the sous vide machine work, but I ended up cutting it all in the edit because, frankly, it's kind of boring. I'm a programmer, so I dig that kind of stuff. If you guys want to see how it worked, drop me a line in the comments and I'll make a follow-up video that covers it. Cheers.